Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez. This is Interviews from Caracas on a special occasion as the city is hosting the School of Critical Decolonial Thought. Today we are talking to Karina Ochoa, a feminist activist and researcher from Mexico. Thank you, Karina, for your time.
Thank you very much.
So tell us, why today in 2018 are we still talking about decolonization?
Bueno, mucha gente se pregunta por qué volver.
Well, many people wonder why to look back 500 years ago to understand the processes that we live in today, huh? The increase in violence in Latin America, for example, in Central America, the processes, for example, the growth of feminicide in Mexico, Guatemala, Salvador, Nicaragua. And many times when we look back and when they hear the debate of the colonial feminism, the first question that they ask is why being back? And we make this genocide because the parties of dominations that were set up 500 years ago explain still today many of the current dynamics that remain in force. That is to say, 500 years ago, the process of conquest and colonization into our territories interrupted the development of our societies and imposed a new form that we didn't know. They have continued and are currently in force as well, for example, in Mexico. Since the 90s, began to appear the phenomenon of disappearance of women. The women, for example, Ciudad de Juárez, because they represent the beginning of a phenomenon that has been expanding in the country and also in the continent. And they start with a specific group of female bodies that disappeared less than 10 years. It's generalized to the whole population. In Mexico, we're talking about 30,000 disappeared women, according to official figures, and a figure of up to 80,000 according to non-governmental organizations, right? Now, where we find the origin of this mechanism, that has to do with the enforced disappearance, because we found it 500 years ago with the process of conquest and colonization that ensured the process of genocide of the population, that had organizational system, political, social, cosmogonic system. Let's say that were instructed and crushed from an act of violence that was the conquest. Then, to understand how it's given the process, help us to understand where there is a continuum or a continuation of the partners of colonial domination. There is certainly the process of conquest, and decolonization had an effect on the bodies of women. There are actually certain records that date, which show that the acts of conquest, the first thing what they did was to annihilate within the population the male who could in some way represent the resistance of the colonial forces. For example, for conquerors, but left fundamentally alone children and women who were, of course, white forms of dominations that went to rape by mechanisms that are still in force in society today in 2018, right? So I think that personally to understand what happens today, it is truly necessary to understand what happened 500 years ago. For example, the populations that were kidnapped from Africa and brought in slavery conditions that were 500 years ago. For the same time, an association between slavery and skin color to an act of kidnapping and the slavery. In Mexico, for example, one of the lines of the investigation of enforced disappearance has to do with the neo-slavery, for example. For example, the drug trafficking is need of some kind of work for to make the narcotonic, for example, that works in the clandestine laboratories, and then when it's exposed in this process neo-colonial and for neo-slavery, where this kidnapping of specific populations that then they're used for the slavery equality for these illegal activities. So it is not less to return back to the past to understand how many of the phenomena acts are part of the continuation or continuum of the parties of the colonial domination.
And you were referencing to female decolonization, not female empowerment. What would be the difference there?
Sí, dentro de los feminismos.
Yes, within the feminist decolonism of the so-called decolonial feminism, here I want to make a clarification. We are not talking about single decolonial feminism, but a feminism decolonialism. A first critical of this is, for example, poses to the category of gender, of a gender perspective, which is done in different dimensions. The gender category is a category that is switched mainly in English in North American universities that allude to specific realities of white, westerns, middle-class women, metropolitan women, and who do not necessarily respond to the realities of women in our America. So how come the gender perspective between the decades of the 80s and the 90s, Latin American through the academy, but also through a process of generalization of ONGs in a context that in Latin American is entering all the neoliberal policies, right? The category of gender gives explanations enough about the inequality of men and women, between men and women, but it's unable, it is insulated, the category of explanation of the example for the relations of inequality and subordination between North and white American women, middle classes, metropolitan, and one illegal Mexican migrant man who is hired by that white woman. In the category of gender, it's not possible to give an explanation of the relationship and inequality where the white woman is in a position of superiority in front of the migrant, Latino, racialized, illegal in the United States. Then the category of gender is isolated, doesn't give us the elements to give explanation about the realities that leave racialized populations. Inequality between white women and Afro-descendant women can be explained only in terms of gender, because it shares the status of gender, but probably do not share the same condition of class, and basically do not share the same racial inequality. Then we're not talking about empowerment, because empowering comes to the construction of a policy and categorism that does not respond to the reality of women, Latin American racialized women. They are still part of the reality of the colonial, that despite the independence process has not finished because the colonial subjectivity remains in our bodies, in all realities and the environment in which we live. Then, when we talk about empowerment, we put the discussion on the realization of the coloniality as a central debate to understand the reality of women, of the population who have been colonized, who are still colonized, and again colonized and racialized, and not to be explained through the framework of categorism that are constructed for white and Western families in today.
And we are also looking at female groups that are more vulnerable in this whole process of decolonization. For example, the aspects of women in, for example, the migrant caravan that is traveling through Central America to reach the United States.
Yes, before coming to Venezuela, I was listening steadily in the news in Mexico with respect to the caravan of migrants who's coming through Central America, that they were already entering Mexico to reach the border with North and the United States. And the first thing that I did, and it seemed to me, that is said in press and on the radio, as they say that this phenomenon is unprecedented in Mexico. That in Mexico never had happened, that came that a massive migration, where families of all intents to cross borders. And these say that was something unusual. But I tell precisely that this situation of migration and displacement such as this happening is given a conditions of war. For example, the process of that we're seeing almost in the situation of Syria, for example, isn't it? We saw it in Kosovo in the decade of the 90s. We have seen the migratory processes in condition of a declared war. In an issue that is the Central American Mexico, it's not declared a war, but it's naturalized a war condition that had that question about the place of women occupying countries or where violence is naturalized, where the war is not declared from one state to another, or civil war, for example. There's no ability whatsoever. It becomes naturalized a scenario that we had in Latin America for some of the decades ago. We have the case of Colombia, we have the case of Mexico, and we have also all the experience that is generalized or use violence as a political weapon. And that is very important for social demobilization. For example, the migration, not only the migratory phenomenon, who is given right now massively, to understand the migration process has increased in recent decades, but in Central America, to the United States, does not only have to do with the process of immigration, but has to do with what the open of the neoliberal that has deepened in the colonial logic that has been generated, that is the population certain countries, such as Honduras, or a military country. He's in a coup against Melesañana in Guatemala, Salvador, etc. These populations have to decide to leave their countries, in the countries themselves, because there is no guarantee of condition of reproduction of life. Then we have serious problems, for example, in the case of women. In Mexico, there are studies that show how women who migrate many attempts eject their self-contraceptives because they know in the journey they can be raped. Then, a woman who assumes the risk to get that race to the United States is because they know in their country there's no guarantee of their safety. What I want to say with this, because I know that you will have to go this part because I'm getting way long in this answer. What I mean is that these migratory processes that we're living in has to do with the logics of perpetuation of the violence of the states of the world with the condition of the naturalization of life. That is not life, actually. When we are in conditions of war, it comes in a colonial logic of 500 years ago that is found in the logic of a war concentration camp that has been constant in the history of our America. I conquer it, exist the I exist, as it Dussel says. That we have lived in Latin America for many centuries has been the strength of the existence of the war. The violence that still prevails as a mechanism that guarantees the political power and colonial power today that is not necessarily in the hands of local elites, but a deeply colonial and creole, but still in the national radicals.
And before we end our show here, I wanted to ask you, so if we have all these problems, what is the next step to combat them? What can the research do, the researchers like yourself can do in Mexico and in the region?
Yes, in Latin America for a long time there are a lot trying to through an out in action posed by the process of decolonization, isn't it? Today presented in this third school of thought of critics and post-colonial in Venezuela to part of the discussion that we're given how to build alternatives that imply process of decolonization, because within the Latin American left, students struggling to have an horizon against the mother band, and therefore the part of the failure that we find in the left right-wing party are in the continent, right? Then, for me, the challenge is bigger, because it has to be with the process of decolonization, and the process of decolonization can not only be political and economic processes, but also by subjective processes. And then let's say that one thing is very strong, and is the most difficult one, is to make a revolution of the consciousness and mindsets of people. The revolution of subjectivists will begin to transform these logics and operate and allow to prevail. This because the logics of domination have not been interrupted in these years in a region for more than 500 years ago.
So indeed, it's a challenge that we have ahead. Thank you very much for your time, Karina.
Thank you for the invitation.
We've been talking to Karina Ochoa, feminist activist and researcher in Mexico, about the topic of decolonization and how it connects to feminisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're back. We're discussing decolonial thought in Latin America and in the world. Now we have with us Houria Bouteldja, a political activist from France. Thank you for being with us, Houria. So tell us, what is the difference between the sense of indigenism in Latin America and in the rest of the world connected to this decolonization topic?
We hear in French, where the political party, which in my case is called Indigenous of the Republic, the word indigenous doesn't have the same meaning that it had here in Latin America, especially since being indigenous in French is a colonial state. France, as a colonizer country, wanted to disperse the population and colonize within a legal point of view. Leaving colonization in the moment of independence where our parents emigrated as workers. Today in France, there is a population resulting from histoire and trafficking in blacks. Colonization followed by specific state racism, a population that is racially discriminated against in France. That specific racism comes from colonial history. Now we have that French ideology consists that there is no reason in French and that we are equal citizens. With the reappropriation of the indigenous pala, we mean that there are a second-time citizens in France who come from colonial history. Our situation and our condition in France come from the fact that we were colonized in the past and that France still is a state colonial.
So you've had your experience with the Indigenous Party in France. How did that come through?
It all started when we founded the party in 2005, within the context of after September 11. Within this context were there agreed French ideological onslaughts and Islamophobia to reflect that Muslims in French. After September 11, the Muslim community was highly stigmatized. I don't know if you know that here in Venezuela, it seems that the Muslim population receives an unprecedented French ideological onslaught. It is a matter of explaining, of considering the Muslim community as were historical savage, as were necessary to civilize it.
So Houria, how do we take on the challenge of protecting, we could say, the vulnerable religious groups in the world?
In the first place, we must consider them human beings above. In France, there is an ideology than secularism, a modern ideology that believes that believers are in any way. They are not mother, but that there are a kind of alienation when you are a believer. In addition, there is an historical and colonial thought that, in any case, Muslims are a form of civilization, which doesn't go along with Western civilization, which must civilize. The colonial struggle in French is to consider the Muslim population and the Afro-descendants population as citizens and human beings. That is to say that they participate in humanity, and the colonial struggle is also to rehabilitate the religious fact. That is to say, to consider the spirituality, the religion, the tradition are part of the social and political life.
And how can we connect all of this to groups of people in the present time, for example, Palestine, people in Africa? Their countries are being torn apart, their people are being destroyed.
The struggle for the liberation of Palestine is our struggle. France is culturally approach Zionism and approach Israeli country. The French elitists and pro-Israelis. Why? Because in France there are colonial traditions, simply because France was involved in the creation of the State of Israel. Therefore, France is a country against the Palestinian cause. We in France, as we fight for the liberation of Palestine, is to fight the Zionist cause. It is extremely difficult, and we are criminalized and attacked as an anti-Semitic state because we support Palestine. Today, it is normal to support the Palestinian cause because the Palestinians are currently colonized by the state of Israel, roasted as we were colonized by the French. As you know, we have an intimate knowledge of what colonialism is. It is natural that we fight for the Palestinian cause, and we also fight for the liberation of Africa. France currently has an army in some African countries, and many African countries have no sovereignty. Likewise, we are the people of Latin America struggling for independence against American imperialism. That's why we feel solidarity with the Venezuelan people. This is the reason why.
And what are your thoughts about the socialist revolutions or leftist movements across Latin America and their fight against colonization?
For us, it is a struggle against imperialism, for social equality. It is a fight that we support. which we observe from French, where the conditions are extremely difficult because the French media. The French elites dedicate themselves to advertising anti-Chavez. In French, it's very hard to say you are Chavez. For example, it is complicated because Chavez presented with the French media as a diabolical politician, like an autocrat. That is to say, the advances we never found it. In French, of everything that the Chavez revolution achieved. In French, we are with a party of extreme left and the decolonialized movement equality. We know that we have a duty to support Venezuela's struggle.
And how can we achieve this connection through different political organizations in the world? It seems that we're doing a really good job in France, a really good job here and there, and we might be losing contact with different people that will make our organizations or our political ideas stronger.
That's a good question. There is currently an international network called the Réseau DECOLONIAL International, the International Decolonization Network, which reorganized the north of Bandung. This is inspired by the Bandung Conference of 1955, which was the founding moment of the alliance between the countries of the South against the United States, where they proposed a third vote of liberation of the people. The Bandung of 1955, within the framework of the International Decolonization Network, we organized in Paris, but lately on Bandung of the North, which consists in explaining that there are in the countries of the North, in imperialist countries like France, England, the United States, and Germany, that the minority coming from the previously colonized countries will unite politically to fight imperialism within the same empire. In this way, to show or in any case, to be active within the solidarity with the struggle for the liberation of the country of the Sound.
And there's also another topic that is interesting to discuss. Can we only rely on legislators, on people and political parties inside national assemblies or senates or our Congress to do the laws that we need to protect our population, or do we need people on the streets as well, people protesting, doing boycotts against corporations? Which one is stronger, or do we need them both together?
First of all, we must not rely on power, but speak from a French point of view. French power is a reactionary power. We don't in any way trust in the National Assembly or the political party as they exist. We believe that it should be a popular organization presently to get our demands forward. Now, we hope that one day the militants resulting from our means of our struggle can gain access to power and find resolve to defend our demands. Yes, it is important that we have our representative in Parliament, for example, but there needs to be the counterpower of a strong social base that in some ways control the political men and women who represent us.
And also, before we end the interview, I would like to ask you, what are your thoughts or ideas that you have towards political education? Because at the end, it's about changing people's hearts and minds, as once already told, to change how people think and how they grow up and how they make their own political ideas, and they change their own houses, their cities, their communities as well.
It is a prevalent objective to transform people and political spaces. We need to create political organization from the ground up. Political education cannot from above. It is necessary that on the ground, the political organization that takes shares of the promotion of the fight.
And how do you see the future now? Yourself, your organization, your country, your continent? How do you see it as a challenge in a positive way?
I'm a bit like Brancy. I believe there must be optimism of the will. At the same time, in the horrible constant where we live, there in a pessimism of reason. Pessimism of reason and optimism of the will.
La lucha continua.
Indeed, it's a challenge, but we have to continue fighting. Thank you very much, Houria, for your time. We've been talking now to Houria Bouteldja, a political activist from France, on the topic of decolonization as well. Thank you very much for your time.